Yeah, there
Here you go, it's recording.
you're taking my glasses.
What do you think?
I
You go well with my contacts.
know, I'm sure when you put them on, when you're, yeah, so they're still dark. Crazy that. It's the only thing that I don't like about the transition, but it just makes it easier not to have it on a set of glasses, but then the changeover, I gotta work on that technology. So good morning. So we're a smaller group here today because everybody might be getting ready for Seder. I don't know where Lee went.
He's upstairs.
He came in the building and then didn't make it downstairs.
He's
here.
doing a presidential thing.
He's just wandering around talking to people.
I can go see the rabbi requested his presence.
You can tell him we're getting started so that so he know because I just know he's in the building. Yeah, I won't put the glasses on until they lighten up, because otherwise I look on the screen, it looks like I'm wearing my sunglasses. Good morning, Barbara. Good morning, Pat. I don't hear you, but you can hear us here, okay?
I can unmute, okay. Need the password to get it.
Barbara, you needed a password?
Yep, got it.
Okay,
But still, it was a few extra steps.
okay. Well, glad you made it.
Yes, me too.
Lee's coming.
Okay,
He said he got busted.
I got busted.
you got busted? No, you just get, distracted by other people, other things, right? I would never know what that means when I come into the building or try to leave the building. So really glad to see people back again, especially a couple of one day before Pesach, when we're all kind of crazed getting ready for that. So before we start again, let's just go around and introduce ourselves. I don't know if everybody knows each other, so it's always good when we come together to learn to be say hello. Last time I asked everybody to say what they were hoping to get out of this conversation. So I think that maybe I'll go around and I'll ask people, because the second part of the book is, why is it so difficult to talk about Israel? So this is the harder part here. So I thought that maybe people could share if they think that is true, that it's difficult to talk about Israel, and if at all, why. You don't have to give your entire response, but just one vignette perhaps. So I'll start, so I'll give everybody a chance to think about what they would like to say. In the second half of the book, he talks about a seminal column that Peter Beinart wrote in 2010, and I don't know if people are familiar with Peter Beinart, but he's been, an important writer around the conflict. He now has, in addition to all the columns he writes for major newspapers, he every Friday picks two people who are experts in part of the conflict, and he interviews them. He's got a Substack where he also writes a blog as well, and he's always important to listen to. And he also wrote a book about the conflict many years ago. But in 2010, he wrote a book called The Failure of the American Jewish Establishment. And that article, as I said, really became a seminal piece in which he talks about young people on college campuses, and there's all this research that's done about what their opinions are about Israel and their engagement with Israel, and what they find is they're just walking away. Why are they walking away? Because the conversation's gotten to be too hard, and they want to really engage on the difficult parts of Israel, and nobody really wants to engage with them on that, and so they're walking away. And I think as we go through the conversation here, we see in many ways that what Peter Beinart talked about in 2010 is pretty prophetic in 2024 in terms of what's happening with young people. And so I would say it is difficult to talk about Israel because there are people who don't really want to talk about it honestly, and that makes it hard.
Hi, everybody. Jill Bishop.
I am getting ready for our Seder, which I'm always in charge of with my family, and I have no idea where everybody in my family stands. And I don't know how to approach it in a way that is gonna speak to everyone and not ostracize anyone and recognize the wide variety of beliefs from my almost 18-year-old son who only sees all kinds of bad on Instagram and social media to my convert uncle who probably wouldn't, participate in a conversation like this. And everything in between. And so it is, whether it's in the family or out in the community, it's really hard. And I'm constantly checking myself to think, am I just making excuses because this is Israel? Am I sacrificing my own values and beliefs because this is something that I'm passionate about? And it's very complex and confusing.
I'm Ted Goldsmith. Maybe this is sort of stating the obvious, but I think that, I guess, to me, that seems like the most difficult part is that some people have a link to Israel, and some people don't. I mean, but even Jewish people, I think that, you evaluate it. I mean, I guess from my perspective, if you are critical of Israel, but basically, I think that that's where the difficulty lies, is that when you talk about Israel, there's either a visceral deep connection to Israel, and I think then you tend to skew one way, and there's a more worldly sort of objective view when you look at Israel, and I think people who view it that way, and it's difficult to cross that divide.
Universal versus the particular in terms of, thank you.
I'm Laura Miller, and I very much resonate with both of those. What really pointed out to me, like in terms of a personal vignette, some of the difficulty in talking about Israel is my friend since elementary school, who Alfie Cohen. We have never ever had difficulty talking about anything, no matter how controversial. We've been talking since we were kids, and he started talking about Israel recently. And was making, very good anti-Israel points, always brilliant thinker, incisive, logical. But what made it hard was what you just talked about. He didn't have that visceral connection to Israel that I feel. He didn't have that sort of Holocaust and other persecution and other anti-Semitic related sense of fear that I feel. So it was that lack of that visceral connection, that lack of, feeling emotions in somebody else who was Jewish, that made it really painful to just talk on an intellectual level. I also, probably as many of us, I'm wondering how it will go at the Seder. So what I've decided to do, and I have no idea how it will work, but I decided to, since several people at my Seder will not know each other, to start with pictures, images, and ask people to pick an image. There's 15 of them, because there's like 15 steps at Seder, whatever. And so some of the images could be pretty evocative of things going on in Israel. Some of them would be nothing to do with that, but people can just pick something and talk about it. And so I'm hoping that it will give me a read of the room, in a sense, and either people can go there or not go there and sort of see where things stand before we enter into the rest. So we'll see.
Good luck. Hi, I'm Sue Nadell. I feel very connected to Israel. I spent a year there working on accounts when I was 18, which was a long time ago, on the Lebanese border. I don't like the Israel. I don't like the government of Israel. I don't like what's happening. It's kind of amazing to me as Jews that we can just destroy in the way that is happening in Gaza. And seemingly think nothing about that, as if those human lives don't matter. You know, and I was thinking about the Seder and where God says, you know, my people are drowning and you're rejoicing. And I was thinking about that for my Seder. Now I talk a little bit about that. I've been doing lots of looking for alternative readings, alternative prayers. Just because I think this year it's so hard to do the Seder in the normal way that I've done in the past. So, you know, very conflicted and very sad. And he just was working with a young person, and you know, he talked about how can Jews do this to other people. But what was nice about him is it wasn't in a punch you in the face way. It was in a really intellectual but emotional way at the same time. And I don't understand. I don't get it. So.
I'm nuanced, and I find it easier to talk about Israel now that I'm perhaps more well informed about Israel based on what has transpired and learnings I've taken away from the programs and educational ones here. So I'm grateful for that. And I too am preparing for a Seder. We don't know everyone's perspective, but I'm not apprehensive about it because I think learned through resources that have been provided how to move into that space. So everyone, and maybe everyone's comfortable. And I find it, I'm open-hearted and open-minded because I'm looking forward to hearing what people have to say. And I one of the things is conversation about the oppressed and the oppressor. So I'm not afraid of it. I'm looking forward to it. And yeah, it's complicated. So I too don't come at it. I never lived in Israel. I only made one trip there with Beth Emmett a number of years ago. But it doesn't mean I can't hold all those kind of perspectives in my head, mostly in my head. So I'm looking forward to stitching together the story of Passover with the story about where we are now. I know it won't be easy, but hopefully we can do it gracefully with love, and I'm looking forward to it.
I'm Bob Fields. I've been to Israel. Both of you said, first time when I was a teenager for a couple of months in the B'nai B'rith program. So lived in the communities, various communities of Israel at the time, and Israel was only 10 years old, so it's a different Israel. And subsequent to that, over the past 40, 50 years, I've been there a couple more times. I had experiences good and bad in Israel with Israelis because I'm a Reformed Jew. So I look at it and I understand it. I can't respect it, but I understand it and I deal with it when I'm confronted. As far as my experience of looking forward to being at a Seder table, I've already been at family meals where I've been labeled and targeted and not punched, but beaten up for my position on taking another look at Palestinians and how Israelis have been treating them, just not now. And so I'm not looking forward to being at a Seder because I know my hands will be tied, my legs will be tied, and I'll have tape put over my mouth. But they know me for that. So what are they supposed to do? They should not invite me. That's right. So when I go to Seder, like a lot of us do, I will bring an extra outside reading piece that I share around the table. And I says, you're gonna read this, you're gonna read this, you're gonna read this, and we're gonna go around it. And I've learned I don't need to bring too many sheets. This time I only bring 2 sheets. And one of them has to do with a prayer that I picked up online that was put online just a day after the flight of missiles and drones into Israel to protect Israel, to speak about the Exodus and how a comparison of what did the Jews or what did the Hebrews at the time think about when they were going out into the desert? How were they to sustain themselves? It's just like all these incoming missiles, how are we gonna survive? So there's all kinds of things that put me not only in a, I'm looking at Ted's salad bowl. I was gonna say it's sort of like a mixed salad, but no, I feel like I'm sticking my hand in a meat grinder. I'm going to it, and I don't look forward to it. It's gonna be a pain. What else can I say? Thanks for.
I'm glad that this is a safe space to talk, but I can say, that's what we wanted this to be, so thank you for sharing, thank
I
you.
think we need a part 3 to.
Yeah, for the sake of we may need to come back to how that
Yes,
happened, right?
I'm Jessie McDonald, and as you can tell from my last name, my husband's not Jewish. And this feels to me like something I have experience in through, how long have we been together? I don't know, for 45 years, balancing, and it's kind of feels terrible. But I find now that my main feeling is, well, I resonated with what Laura said about she doesn't have whether she'll be able to read the room. And I thought, read the room. I'm always reading the room around extended family, and I hate that. And why do we have to do that? Why do we have to read the room about everything in America? But I've gotten into difficult conversations with people who are my friends here at Beth Emmet, who, if I mentioned a sympathy for the Gaza people, I kind of was criticized harshly, and so that's made me fearful of bringing it up with my Beth Emmet friends. I have a good friend who is Jewish but totally non-observant, and we had lunch one day, and I mentioned, my feelings, pro-Israel feelings, and she was furious with me and would like stunned with me. This is a person I know from my social justice areas, and neither one of us, it's been months now, neither one of us has tried to call or reach out to the other. And so it feels horrible, but many things in America feel horrible to me right now. And I have escaped the Seder dilemma by, well, first I'm going to a friend's for dinner, and she has 2 young adult sons who are married, who have very, very strong anti-Israel feelings right now. And she told me, I've already said Israel, Gaza's off the table, we're not discussing it. So with my little tiny Seder I'm having at home, I've solved the problem because we are going to do a Earth Day, nature-oriented, environmental Seder. And the Haggadah, I'll just put a little plug in, was written by J.R. Zumwalt's daughters, who run this regenerative farm down in Sheldon, Illinois. And they've written the Haggadah, and it's really pretty neat. So I'm going to do that for my little one. I will say one more thing. Even Douglas, who is so totally supportive of my Judaism, he has no desire to be a Jew, totally supportive and always has been, and never says anything negative about Israel when I start talking and upset. But even there, I think deep down, if it weren't me, would you say something? And I feel that way about his brothers, who are always very, cosmopolitan. One lives in Manhattan, very, lots of Jewish friends. But I'm always thinking like, yeah, well, what would you say if you really talked about how you felt? So that's kind of bad right now. It's my story.
This is the same place.
Right.
My name's Becky. So I grew up in a home with parents who, I never quite knew where they stood on Israel, but you never talk about it publicly. You never criticize about it publicly. And so this was the home that I grew up in. I grew up in Young Judea, which is the youth group of Hadassah, which when I was 9, they basically say, you're gonna make Aliyah, you're moving to Israel. So that was always like my mindset. I lived in Israel during the Lebanese War. I was like one of the first, I don't know why my parents let me go, but like, we arrived right after the war broke out. So I saw the ugly side of Israel in a lot of ways and came back very changed, but I was still gonna make Aliyah. And the way my parents said is, you can go to Israel for a year, but you have to go to college. And so I came back as promised, and I met my husband, then boyfriend, who said, let's get married, but we're not moving to Israel. So there's a lot of conversation that our families are here. And so, you know, during the pandemic, I reconnected with a lot of my friends from Young Judea, and a lot made Aliyah, a lot came back, but there's still this rah, Israel can do no wrong, and we need to do whatever we can. And so it's, you know, for me, it's been a real loss of like a lot of memories, a lot of my childhood, because these are people who made me, and this is why I work in the Jewish community, because of my love for the Jewish people and for Israel. And to have that whole part of me kind of just disassociate, like separated, it's just been really hard. And there's been some chatter that I saw on Facebook recently about talking about this conversation, about avoiding this conversation, like not wanting conflict. I'm like, these are people who like were in the streets protesting with me when I was in Israel. So it's like, so I'm kind of going through that. I'm really blessed that my parents and my brother, sister-in-law, and my little 6-year-old niece is going to come. And so I did put it out there that I do want to have this conversation. As we know, that the Haggadah is so rich for conversation. But all the stuff that we sent out this week, and I've been sleuthing a lot online about how to lead this conversation. But I know that my parents are going to get angry. I know that my 6-year-old niece goes to a Jewish day school in DC, who is like, Israel could do no wrong. She's got her little flag, and she made her little Haggadah, and she's going to sit. I mean, this kid stays up late, so she's going to sit through the whole Haggadah, the whole Seder. So how do we have that conversation in front of her when she sees only goodness? So I'm really struggling with this. My brother's deeply embedded in the political world. Last Friday night, he had his 2 best friends for Shabbat dinner. Both worked for the Biden administration. Both several times had to go out to the backyard and have conversations, like that was their safe space. So my brother already knew something was up. And so that was also very interesting. So he comes at it from a very political perspective. So I don't know what the hell I'm going to do on Monday night. And you'll find out Tuesday night. Tuesday night. I don't know. Like, I'm really, Dan and I are really struggling with this. So I'll talk to you on section 3 and we'll have a conversation. But it's something we're really struggling with because I want to have that conversation.
Wow, this is gonna take up the whole class. There's a lot of pain here, and
But this is what's important.
This is
you know,
absolutely,
you know,
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of pain here, and I'm so appreciative of this conversation. I've been thinking about Passover, and so I'm glad that we're having this now. I'm gonna borrow some of these ideas and maybe even borrow the environmental approach. So I'm Suki Fisher, and you know, the Peter Beinart piece has always been very, very interesting to read him, and I think it's interesting that one of his conclusions is that you would have some disengagement from young people from Israel. And my family is probably the opposite, and that's why we're going to have a very hot Seder, because we have young people who are very engaged in Israel, and not in a sense that's necessarily, you know, a lot of pain and struggle there. So it will be a very important conversation at our household for sure. And I, you know, what I love about this book is, you know, there's some things, this is our lifetime. It's not a history book in many sense. I'm like reading, oh, what was I doing in 1890? Oh yeah, right, I was flying around here. And, you know, it's very much a living document. And I was thinking how my life, the way it maps against the history, you know, I was starting to make a little timeline and saying, oh, this is what I was doing. This is where I got married. This is when I went to Israel. This is when I didn't do this. And my timeline is so different than my kids' timeline. I mean, my October 1994, right? So he didn't experience anything but a lot of war. And I think warring factions in Israel. I think with a difference in when I look across my timeline and their timeline is hope, right? There are a lot of very, very troublesome, difficult things that have happened in Israel throughout its history. And a lot of times we kind of, you know, shut our eyes and, oh, you know, yeah, we see these brave, handsome Israeli soldiers, you know, beating young, unarmed Palestinian kids in areas of that are actually areas of Israel even. And so, you know, we kind of have to, you know, put my blinkers down because there's always been hope. Well, this is just part of what has to happen till you get to a peace process, and there will be peace. But in my kids' lifetime, when I look at the timeline, there is no opportunity for them to see any hope, really, I think. I mean, hopefully there will be, but when I look at the timeline realistically, they haven't seen opportunities for hope.
So where am I going with that? The Seder. So what's going to happen at the Seder? What kind of conversations are we going to have? Well, I think all of our Jewish traditions are fantastic in a very pragmatic way. And so the Seder is this really wonderful vehicle for conversation and dialogue. And what better way to have a really difficult conversation than serve people 4 glasses of wine and sing at the end, and it was singing, right? You know, so no matter what happens, you got a meal out of it and you sang, right? So the difficult part was that journey in the 4 glasses. And so at our Seder, we were all invited to take an element of the Seder and talk about it. And I decided I would talk about the 4 sons. I'd probably talk about them as the 4 children. And I was just thinking that a beautiful thing about our Seder too is there's a narrative and it's a common narrative, but we start out by saying, well, people have different perspectives, you know, they have different filters, they have different lenses, and we're going to group them into 4 because that's simple, right? That's a simple way to do it. But really, I was thinking how to reflect that in my family, that the 4 perspectives perhaps of how we look at what's happened in Israel and the history of it. So I'm not sure where I'm going with that. I've got a lot of things I've mimeographed that nobody will read, I'm sure, if I pass it out, but it's a start. And so I'm really excited about the Seder as an opportunity. I didn't actually say that.
You did. You actually said it, mimeograph. Now we're really.
We're out of time. So anyway, thank you for so it's a great opportunity to have a very difficult conversation, and I appreciate this book and everything we talked about so far. Lots more conversation here, I'm sure.
Thank you. So we have Pat, Barbara, and Janet who are online. So Pat, would you like to jump in?
The Seder, I'm going to listen, mostly because I don't have the perspective. I love this book because the first half, I can see, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
The first half, all these things that happened one at a time, and I didn't have very much background. I now have background and I have a much better perspective of what's happening. And I can see patterns. I can see patterns in the Palestinian effect on Jordan. I can see patterns in the Palestinian effect in Israel. And I can see Palestinian effects in the United States. But I don't have enough perspective right now. I was infuriated when the October 7th, the US news coverage, or PBS news coverage, was about Palestine instead of the destruction that happened to the Israeli society. And you know, people, I mean, and how I couldn't understand, and I was just appalled at the news coverage, and I knew that we weren't getting a very good picture. So I'm going to listen. I'm just going to listen. I've always I've never really approached people as a religion. When my daughter was born, I traded babysitting with an Iranian woman that became my best friend. And when my kids were in New York City and they were in preschool, I became best friends with people from the Israeli consulate. So I have a foot in each camp, technically. I just have to listen. I have to understand more before I have a good perspective.
Thank you. Barbara?
I'm Barbara Stock. Like Suki, I'm very, very appreciative of the openness of everyone in this conversation. I don't know that we'll get to the book, and I have to leave at 11 o'clock, but this conversation was worth it. Just hearing everybody and where each of us is. So I'm fortunate that I'm a guest for Monday night and Tuesday night. I'm not having my Seder until Saturday. And I wrote a feminist Haggadah for myself maybe 35 years ago. So I keep updating it, and I'm using all kinds of things from the internet, like the empty chair, like double portions of moror. We're gonna have all kinds of ways of making it relevant. I have a very close friend. We grew up together in high school, and we talk. We're on the very same page. So of course she's right, and I appreciate that. And so we can talk about Israel freely. But I found the generational differences are challenging. And Andrea, you know, I was at a wedding, and Rachel and Adam, my niece and nephew, Cantor and Rabbi, and their son, whom I adore, Aiden, was there, and Aiden is a senior at Brown. Very different perspective, and I watched his parents just squirming, but I wanted to hear him. I wanted to get that, to understand that perspective. It's terrifying for me. It's very frightening, but I think there's such a generational difference, and I think Peter Beinart was prescient, and I think it's a real concern. And I think we see it as a concern, we hear it as a concern, which is good, because that means somehow it's going to have to get addressed in that generation and the generation following it, the younger kids. So like Pat, I plan to do a lot of listening, and I want to go with a curious mind, but I also know I have very passionate opinions, and I have to really be very careful with myself and very observant. So thank you all for being so open.
Thank you. Jan?
Hi, I'm Jan Iltis, and I was only able to watch the recording last week, and I was so impressed with what people said about the fact these are people who I know to really know a lot about Israel, and they were so amazed that they learned so much more. And so I quickly purchased the books. They're supposed to come today. And I'm going to give one out to each family that comes to the Seder. We're going to do it the second night. I'm going someplace the first. And everybody likes, well, my daughter likes to keep everything very copacetic. And I don't think I can do that this year. I think it needs to come up, and people need to say exactly how they feel, and I'm open to all of that. We have 2 people at the Seder who are not Jewish. My daughter's significant other and my ex-son-in-law's significant other, who is from China. And it'll be very interesting to see if any of them speak up. I have noticed in my neighborhood, unfortunately, which is primarily Christian, that people avoid me now because I think they don't know what to say, because they're so disturbed by what's going on. And these are people who came to my B'nai Mitzvah last July, but they're like not available anymore. So it's very disturbing to me. I just look forward to anything that you have to say, Rabbi. Thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for sharing so openly. And I am not surprised at what we're thinking about today, the day before the Seder, or the Seder. So I don't know if people read the email that I sent out to the congregation with suggestions for how to do Passover, but I'm going to share just a little bit about it.
I have 10 tabs open.
You have 10, you have 10 tabs
Those
open.
references. Thank you.
But I just, want to, want to share with you. And this was the introduction, that we did when, Doctors Hussein Ibish and David Myers were in town doing the dual narrative approach to the history. And when we had the conversations afterwards, we started with this idea. So I just will share with you. Let all who are hungry come and eat. We remind ourselves at the beginning of our Seder when we recite Halach Ma'anya, the bread of affliction, of the sacred obligation of opening our homes and inviting people over for a sumptuous meal. Seder, of course, is more than just matzo ball soup and gefilte fish. Provides food for thought. Before we eat, we first tell the story of our people's exodus from Egypt and contemplate its meaning today. As we read in the Haggadah, whoever expounds upon the story of the Exodus is to be praised. How do we expound upon the story this year? Many people are nervous about how the conversation around their Seder table will go. I guess nobody here is. So, given the variety of strong opinions about the war in Israel and Gaza within our families and amongst our friends. Interfaith has a bridge building curriculum that teaches us how to engage in conversation when emotions are running high and opinions are strong. We use these techniques during the conversations that followed each lecture during our Scholars in Residence weekend in February. And then this is the invitation that we started those conversations with. Our intention is to take seriously the things that others hold dear. If it matters to you, then it will matter to us. We are not here to convince anyone they are wrong or try to change them. We are curious why people think the way they do, and rather than thinking we are diminished by listening carefully to ideas we might disagree with, we trust that we are enhanced by it, and we believe there is more common ground and experience than we anticipate. And when there isn't, we can fundamentally disagree with someone and still respect, even love them. I'm going to begin my Seder with that. I'll probably read it more than once. Make sure that everybody, really hears that. Then what we did actually when we were in our groups is we didn't try to have a conversation all together at first. Because as we did here, we were a small enough group, everybody had a chance to kind of share what was on their heart. People are going to come in with stuff on their heart. And if you don't give them a chance to speak about the stuff that's on their heart, it's going to come out one way or another, right? I'm looking at the therapists in the room, right? It comes out, in other kinds of ways. So how do you create a space where people are coming in with stuff and, and not talking about the elephant in the room doesn't make the elephant go away. So what we actually did during the conversations after that Scholar in Residence weekend is we divided people up into dyads. And we had people talk one-on-one because it's a little easier and a little safer. And if it's just about being able to express ourselves. And what we did is I turned on a 2-minute timer. And I said, one person's going to talk, the other person's just going to listen. You're not allowed to interrupt. You're not allowed to say anything to the person. Just listen really intensely and deeply and with an open heart. And when those 2 minutes are over, then you get your 2 minutes to share. And no one's going to interrupt you either. And then after those 4 minutes were over, after each person had an opportunity to speak, we had a little bit of time for a little bit of, cross conversation, but with the invitation of, coming in with open heart. And, one of the issues we have around this is people come in wanting to convince people. The worst way to try to convince people is try to convince people. It's true. If you come in with a pretty strong view and somebody else comes in and tells I'm going to convince you otherwise, we're not usually really open to that. None of us are. And so, the way to really grow is to deepen the listening and the curiosity and not trying to change people's opinions. That's actually how people's opinions change. In case you really wanted to change somebody's opinion, you should go and not changing to change, but just to say, I'd like to share. People are more open to when you share, I just want to share, this is what I'm feeling. And, not have people come after you. My Seder table, like yours, is going to be diverse, and it's diverse not just because of the people of different age groups and different faiths. I'm actually going to have around my Seder table a Palestinian and a Jewish Israeli at my Seder table. So I'm going to have, at my, but it's really, there's so many opinions even within our own community. I think that Jesse was sharing that really powerfully, you know, that we see. And something that I've been sending out to the congregation over the last 6 months is many notes about trying to hold the diversity of our congregation. And many people don't see that diversity. Why? Because they're not talking to each other. So there's people who think a certain way, who think that everybody really thinks that way. And people have said to me, Rabbi, that's not true. And I said, because those people aren't talking to you. They don't want to talk to you. They're afraid to talk.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So the idea of, everyone, of course, is welcome to their own opinions, but not their own facts. And so when you, at the same time, don't want to try to convince people to believe what you believe, but you feel that they're operating with a different set of facts or a lack of political and historical context without having a platform or all of the flagged information transferred to your brain, where I get stuck on that when I see these very black and white approaches that Israel has done this for the Palestinians for 70 plus years and dehumanized them, and these broad strokes. And I'm left feeling that there's a lot of validity there, but there's also so much that you're not representing. And so how do you combat that in these casual conversations without pulling up a PowerPoint and of all of their inaccurate facts or lack of historical context? I don't know if I'm making sense.
Yeah, no. It's one of the reasons, you know, that we did the Scholar in Residence weekend and then had the conversations afterwards was for that exact reason. Because sometimes we just gather in these conversations, people give their opinions and they just whatever limited knowledge or TikTok they were listening to, you know, was what comes out, you know, and so, you know, that I thought that it's best to actually start with a level playing field because we're responding to something we've all heard together as opposed to, you know, whatever we happen to come into the space with. I don't know if I shared with you the story about Harvard, my friend who's on sabbatical at Harvard, and he was talking to one of the deans at Harvard, and there was all these students who were sitting in this dean's office protesting against the war. And so the dean was, you know, being a good educator, you know, not doing what they did at Columbia, which was ridiculous and horrible, and of course just exacerbates the situation. And that's my opinion about what they did there. And clearly the president's getting a lot of, you know, push to do those things. But anyway, the dean came, you know, was like serving the kids pizza and wanting to engage them in conversation, you know, being an educator and being a parent and not, you know, trying to just like come and tell them facts, and went to them in curiosity and said, you know, I don't really know very much about this conflict and I'd like to learn more. Can you give me books or other kind of resources that I should go to? And the lead student kind of turned red and said, this is our TikTok person we've been following. You know, and it was like, this is Harvard University, you know, it was pretty horrifying that the students were coming in with, you know, some person they were following on TikTok, you know. So, I mean, I think that in these conversations, you know, a part of the issue is you give people space and then you need to say, I hear you. And now I'd like an opportunity. And the opportunity is to say, you know, there's a larger picture here that I see as well. And I also, and when it gets to be too hot, we can also say, I understand that we're not going to come to agreement on this, but I would like to share, you know, my perspective. And sometimes at some point we might have to say, okay, and now we're done. You know, now we're done. But, you know, and this is part of the issue around, you know, the larger perspective to share. You know, Pat, you were talking about the news media after October 7th. Well, there are people who believe on both sides. I mean, there was in 2015 during the Iran deal, I think it was, or maybe it's 2014 during the last war. It's hard to know. There's been so many wars over the last number of years and so many conflicts around this. There was a rabbi who wrote very publicly that gave up his subscription to the New York Times because he thought it was too anti-Israel. And I was having coffee with a Muslim friend of mine. And we were sitting there drinking coffee, and I mentioned this to him, and he almost choked on his coffee. He said, what are you talking about? New York Times is anti-Israel. It's completely pro-Israel, and it's totally anti-Palestinian. I have no idea what you're talking about. I mean, he was just, so, you know, the lens, you know, through which we look at, or what media we happen to look at, You know, I think I began last time by saying that what I've seen over the years is that oftentimes people will have the correct facts, but not a whole context, which is what you're talking about. You know, but they only have this set of facts and they've missed all these other facts over here. And there's reasons that people miss those other facts. Sometimes I want to hear them. You know, a lot of what I feel like, especially when I talk to some people in the older generation, is this is the Israel we know, and that's all we want to know. And anything you say else is anti-Semitic. You know, there's a real emotional, and so you can't really convince people when that's that emotionally charged. You know, and I think the best we can do is just to give people space and not try to convince and to say, you know, I'm concerned because I have these other thoughts about this. And if we get, you know, when we start getting into the fight at the table, I think at that point we say, you know what, we've said what we needed to for now, and now we'll go on to something else. I mean, we can stop the conversation at certain points. It's hard. I'm not saying that this is easy. You know, I have for 35 years tried to teach people about this and get frustrated, you know, that people don't want to learn. They want to come in with whatever. And it's challenging. Very challenging, yeah.
Yeah, I love what you read about at the very beginning that, you know, we care about the people we are
Yes.
with. I mean, and so if we keep that in mind, if I care about you as a person, then I think we come to it with a different perspective. That this is like, why do you feel the way you feel? What does it mean? What is it that's that upsets you so much about this particular situation? I'm thinking of the son of my friend who's having a Seder, who you know, so angry with Israel, so angry with the Biden administration, all of that. And I'm thinking, you know, so this is a young person with a real heart for justice, social justice. And it's kind of an opportunity to make allies for other things that you will want to work on in the future in other areas. So, you know, someone who cares, say, about young children and what's happening to the young children in Gaza, you know, that person can be an ally for some other thing that you do that helps young children. You know, and we could kind of not like we're using people to find allies for other things, but that understanding what's at the root of your strong passion about this, like an older generation, what's at the root, right? This is Israel, but you know, what is it that they need? They need the security of something to believe in that's pure and beautiful and heroic. That's understandable to me, that
Yeah,
we need that in
right.
our lives.
Right.
Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, people do want that, and you know, there's a great deal of fear that if we were to really learn that we'd have to let go of that, and that's all. That's big. Part of it is just to be reflective. I hear, you know, can you reflect back to somebody, you know, what you've heard in terms of, you know, what they have said. You know, I hear that you're really concerned about the people of Gaza. I am too. I hear what you say. And you know what, how he ends the book, you know, which I also think is really powerful and positive, is to try to find examples of people who are not stuck in this binary between Israel right or wrong or Palestinians right or wrong, but that there's something something in between. And so, you know, I wouldn't start the conversation by saying, well, when they say that Israel's done all these things wrong, well, the Palestinians have done things wrong. Ain't gonna get anywhere with that, okay? Because what the first thing they're gonna say, if you say, you know, that Palestinians have done things that are wrong, they're gonna say, but Palestinians have never had the power, you know? And so that's gonna be a rabbit hole. Don't go down that rabbit hole. You know, I hear that. Hear that Israel has done things wrong, you know? And, you know, let's talk, but what does it mean that Jews live there, that they need safety and security as well? How do we move forward in a way that would have that happen, and at the same time for Palestinians to be able to have that? You know, is it a zero-sum game that is either one or the other? I mean, I think that that's, we can go, yeah, I understand that, and as opposed to saying all the things the Palestinians did wrong, or vice versa. All the things Palestinians, have done right, and then but Israel's right. It doesn't get you anywhere. You're not going to get anywhere. The worst thing that can stop us, the worst part in this conversation you can do is, Palestinians have always walked away from the table. Don't go there. Don't go there, folks. Ain't gonna get anywhere if you say that with people who are, convinced that the Palestinians have been wrong. Israel's also walked away from the table. Okay, Israel's also done nothing, but don't go down that path. Where do we go from here? The other thing that I think that is could be, is really problematic, and he talks about, a couple of the words here. He talks about, BDS and apartheid, in this last part, the A word. And the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. And of course, now what he doesn't talk about, because the book was written before this, is the G word, right? Is it genocide? Is it not genocide? I thought that Husseinovich said something really helpful on the weekend he was here. He said, we can spend a lot of time talking about this terminology and argue whether or not this fits into the UN definition of genocide. But where's it going to get us? We're just going to get stuck on talking about terminology. We can all agree that what's happening in Gaza is terrible. To say, is it a genocide? Is it not a genocide? To use the word genocide, does that help? Anything? And I thought that was really helpful for him to say that. Like, let's talk about it. Let's talk about, the situation. And not talk about, because otherwise, you'll go down a rabbit hole. You want to define whether or not this is genocide? Bye-bye Seder. That's literally like, I would just, that's like not a conversation you're going to ever get anywhere with, does it have to be intentional? Is it intentional? What's happening?
And that's Husseinovich.
Husseinovich said that, yeah. Husseinovich, who's Lebanese.
Okay.
Yeah.
Also, when you put it in a box like that,
Yeah.
you've created the box.
Mhm.
So now it just gets harder to get out of that box, you put the shape around it, that really doesn't help. But it's now sitting there when you could really still be talking about it deeply and listening deeply. You just made your life more difficult. You made the conversation more difficult than it need to be.
Right. When it comes to our faith, and a lot of what we're talking about is the universal and the particular parts of Judaism. And some people are going to approach this much more particularistically and much more concerned about Jews and their safety and well-being and welfare. And others are going to approach this in a more universal way. And I think that's also just being able to kind of see and be able to frame in some way. I hear you're really concerned about, Jewish safety and well-being. I hear that you're, have a larger notion about Jewish values, and what it means for Palestinians who are being harmed. Bye, Barbara. I'm so happy to see you. Hag Sameach.
Thank you. Hag Sameach to everyone.
Hi,
Peace.
Sarah. Yeah, exactly. Peaceful. And so that is also where we're coming from. But I think the other thing is also that to dismiss young people and say, well, you don't remember the Holocaust, you don't remember anti-Semitism, that's also not going to get any young person around your Seder table to listen to you. That's not a useful thing to say. Well, I can tell you. And it's not useful for a young person to say, that anti-Semitism and, that everyone's out to destroy the Jew stuff, that's also BS. Like that isn't going to convince anybody, because we're talking about something that is deeply heartfelt. And we're also talking about trauma. Jews have been traumatized. Palestinians are being traumatized. Israelis are traumatized. Everybody's traumatized. One thing that I've said when people have asked, well, Israelis, they think the war should go on, and so, and we need to support Israelis. That's the other thing here. And you know, I said, I do think we need to support Israelis in their trauma and be genuine and caring about them and what they have been through and what they're continuing to go through. That doesn't necessarily mean that I need to follow their political opinions. We can distinguish between doing something which is empathetic and kind and not saying that because of that, I'm going to follow what their political opinions are now. We can distinguish between those two things. We need to support them in terms of what we're doing with our empathy, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what our politics needs to be. And I think we need to distinguish between those two things also. Pat.
So when the issue of the hostages comes up, do you concentrate on empathy, or how do you handle that?
So, you know, one of the things that we're going to do at our Seder table, you know, there's been this conversation about, you know, having a chair, you know, left empty for the hostages. If you remember, you know, shortly after October 7th, people were putting out Shabbat dinner tables with, you know, all the spaces for all the people who are hostage and weren't coming to their families for Shabbat dinner. We're going to put out 2 chairs. We're going to put out one for the hostages and we're going to put out one for the Gazans. Why can't we have empathy for both people? The Gazans are suffering. The hostages are suffering. It's awful. My heart can be big enough to see that. I don't need to choose. And the other thing that happens is what we call the oppression Olympics goes on. Who is more oppressed? That's not going anywhere either. That's not a way to have a conversation. Who's more oppressed? I mean, I also frankly think that the oppressor oppressed paradigm, as if there's, you know, one oppressor and one oppressed, is the wrong paradigm for this as well. I don't think that's a paradigm that works. And you know, and I was also really moved. So when I think about hope, I don't know how many people were able to make it to the Standing Together event at Lake Street Church. You haven't listened to it. It's on Lake Street Church's Zoom. Go and listen to it. Go and listen to them. If you haven't, you need to. And if you listen to them, go hear them again. They're Jews and Palestinians who live within Israel proper, who say, we don't approve of the status quo. People are being harmed. And we believe that we need to work together to upend that status quo. That together we're going to work for justice and peace. That together, that we understand there's 7 million Palestinians and 7 million Jews who live in this land, and that together we're going to do this. They're a very powerful group. They're the most hopeful group right now that I know. They really are just incredible. And the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, the BDS movement, has boycotted them. Why? There's a concept in the struggle now called normalization. Normalizatia in Hebrew, in case you want to know the Hebrew term. A normalization means, and particularly Palestinian advocates have decried normalization. It means, you know, Jews and Palestinians get together and, you know, they share some cultural event and they eat hummus and they hold hands and they sing kumbaya, and the Jews or the Israeli Jews go home to their homes and they feel really good that they've done something for Palestinians and nothing changes. That's what normalization is. But standing together is not trying to normalize. It says, no, we're coming together not to keep the status quo, not to do cultural exchanges and hold hands and feel good with each other, but we're actually coming together because we believe that the system needs to be upended and we're going to do it together as opposed to in opposition to each other. So that's very different than saying we're normalizing. We're saying, well, it's complicated. Well, we can't do anything about it. Well, no. We also think it's terrible what's happening here. We believe that we can come together and we can change that system. And I think that's an incredibly powerful message. The other thing I would say is that the sides are not between Israelis and Palestinians. That's incorrect. That's not where the conflict is. People think that's where the conflict is, but it's not. The conflict is between those people who want peace and justice and equity and human dignity for everyone and those who don't. Those are the sides. Or, as Rola and Itamar said when they were here, it's between, the civil society and the governments, both. Right now, Benjamin Netanyahu and Yahya Sinwar, they have no impetus to end this war. Why would they end this war? Why should they end this war? What's going to happen to them? Netanyahu is out of office and he's in jail. Sinwar, he's also loses his power. So you have these extremes of people who they have no impetus to end this war. They have no impetus to do that which is right for the people. Because they lose. And so you have this vast civil society, and that's what Sandy Taylor is saying, is we have to rise up, because who's really taking care of us? We have to take care of ourselves. And what has happened over the last, 200 years that this conflict has been going on has been that the extremes are the ones who continue to win the day. But the vast majority of people are not getting what they want and they need, but the extremes have continued to win the day, right? That's what happened with Hamas on October 7th. Is that now they have, this loud voice, and now Israel's trying to do everything and saying, well, we don't want those people who are terrorists to win the day, and so we're not going to fight against them in this way. But is that really the way to get rid of extremism? I think I said this last time, if we really wanted to get rid of extremism in Israel, what Israel should have done is strengthen the Palestinian Authority years ago. You want the extremists to go away? Let's see, how many times we bombed Gaza? Have they gone away? Let's see, 2008, 2009, 2014, 2021, and little skirmishes in between 2023. We're doing a real good job. And let's go, and bomb an embassy in Damascus and kill an Iranian, because that's really going to make the Iranians stand down. How many more generals do they have if they kill this one guy? These targeted assassinations have never worked, ever.
I was just stunned when all the coverage, I have to say, all the coverage where they said that Israel has been invaded and so on and so forth, and they never even talked about the idea that they have unilaterally gone and near an embassy and killed someone. It was just sort of, for those who think that, everybody's anti-Israel, I thought it was just amazing that they never coupled those two things when they were reporting and bad news. I didn't want them to invade Iran, to invade. But I couldn't see any other response that Iran could do.
Right. Well, and this is again where the extremists, are having the day, and that, right. Again, how does Netanyahu take off the pressure on Gaza? We're gonna take, we'll point energy over here. So I think that that's also, a part of what can be done here is, can you bring stories? Like he does here. Can you bring stories of people who are doing this work together? Can you bring stories about the possibility of another way forward? I think that's a powerful thing to bring to your Seder. Yeah.
One of the things I remember you always saying earlier right after October 7th, probably before, is it's very hard for people to keep the two narratives going, at least at the minimum, two narratives going. And, there's the psychological concept of cognitive dissonance. And it seems like the people are mostly only able to focus on their one perspective, and if they try to consider something else, it threatens them because it's going to tear down their perspective. And I think that's part of the whole problem, is that it's just psychologically it's easier for people to try and have one perspective than to try and have balanced perspective.
Yes. Yes, yeah, I think that's true.
I've been listening to a podcast Unapologetic, the third narrative. Familiar with
Mhm,
that?
mhm.
It's two Israeli Palestinians, Israeli Arabs, and they're presenting this third narrative.
It's very good.
It's really interesting, and I'm so appreciating hearing those voices, and so I really recommend that.
Mhm,
Mhm.
mhm. Yeah. And Ezra Klein over the last 6 months has had, interviewed people who I think it's also really helpful to hear, their perspectives and how they look at, what's been going on. It's been very helpful as well.
Jill, what's the name of the podcast?
Unapologetic.
The third narrative.
Other thoughts? I'll be quiet for a little bit. Questions?
Can we talk about River to the Sea?
Yeah. So, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Has been put out, both by Palestinians who believe that they're just saying the Palestinians have not been free and that they want them to be free wherever they live. And others have used it as a way to talk about the destruction of Israel as a Jewish state. Both of those narratives are possible. And people hear it differently. That's the truth of it. And the other thing is that from the river to the sea was also a statement that was made by who many, many years ago about Israel, about the idea of a greater land of Israel. So that has also been said by Jews from the river to the sea. Ariel Sharon believed in that, Jabotinsky, other other thinkers earlier who were Jewish also believed in that notion. So is it anti-Semitic? Is it anti-Israel? Maybe. Maybe yes, maybe no. I think people getting exercised about it is more problematic than anything else. You want to know the truth on some of this stuff. We talk about the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. I think that the thing that has strengthened the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement more than anything else is Jewish opposition to it. Would have gone away. I think Jewish opposition to it has actually been the worst thing, has been what has fueled it. I think from the root of the sea also, I think it's just not clear. And to say that it's blatantly anti-Israel is not clear. I wouldn't use a statement. I think it should say, from the river to the sea, we'll have, peace for everyone. You have to find a rhyme there, but anyway, but I don't believe, I think that, but listen, we have to understand that Palestinians have been the losers in history for the last 200 years. They have been. The Arab countries haven't really been able to help them. The UN hasn't been able to do anything for them. And, and they continue. And if we also complain about their leadership, we have to understand that what happened, the state of Israel was created even before, is that there was a real brain drain. A lot of Palestinian intelligentsia left. And so, who's going to be the leadership, of that community? That's number one. And, number two is, that they have, always been the weaker party. They have been. I think the other thing that comes up, of course, is, the American role in all of this, as we're talking about, Jesse was mentioning about, Biden and Americans. Several very important books that have been written over the last number of years about, the American role. And there's a book that was actually called Blind Spot about America's role in, supporting Israel and not Palestinians, and another one called Preventing Palestine, which was written by a Jewish author. All the things that the United States has done to prevent the creation of Palestinians. That's a whole other. And the young people who come in all know those arguments, and the older people who come in say Palestinians walked away from the table. So And you know, what's happening now in terms of the whole conversation around, you know, should the United States be funding Israel right now? That's another big topic that will come on. Conditioning of aid. The truth of the matter is that the United States, when they supply weapons wherever they do in the world, has laws called the Leahy Law, but that law, that aid, that armaments can only be used for certain purposes. And that they're allowed to inventory and find out, you know, if those if that aid has been, the armament's been used for the correct purposes or not. And it's just never applied to Israel. Some people say, you know, there's a double standard to Israel. You're right. The United States has always let Israel off the hook. Always. Always gives us the benefit of the doubt. Always.
And what do they say when they're pressed?
And what do they say when they're pressed? They say, not fair. You know, we, you know, have this war that we're fighting and we need all of these things. This is the only way we're going to protect ourselves. And, you know, and that's what comes up.
But what does the US say to defend?
Pardon?
What does the US say
To defend what?
as to why they don't press?
They don't, because, you know, there's a strong, you know, lobby that says United States really shouldn't be. You know, they have a lot of political, the political ramifications for actually conditioning and aid in any way in Israel. And we know that. And so they get very quiet about those issues. But there's a real push now for the conditioning of aid.
By mainstream.
By mainstream people, that has never happened before. You know, Senator Van Hollen from Maryland, who's been pushing them. And the conditioning of aid says, you know, we'll give you aid, you just can't use it for these purposes. So. And when it comes to Iron Dome and the funding of Iron Dome and all the protective stuff, the United States has never helped withheld money. And actually, that's not true. The Republicans have tried to withhold money. So the other thing is when they talk about, you know, that who's trying to withhold money from Israel, actually the Republicans have tried to withhold money. They're more right wing, which is, you know, kind of a strange thing. You think, why them? It's because they've tried to have said that aid that needs to go to Israel is also aid to Ukraine, and all those bills are together, and the Republicans don't want that. And so they're the ones who have actually stopped so much of that protective aid, by the way. As people try to complain that it's the squad and other things like that, it's not, it's the Republicans doing it, folks.
So question.
Yeah.
So we can have these conversations in our families, we can have our conversations in our synagogues, and we see there's conversations between different activist communities in Evanston, for example, and some in Wilmette. Where's the conversation happening within the Jewish world, where you have some congregations that are very, very, you know, Israel right or wrong, and then you have questioning congregations, and then you have congregations who are Israel wrong. I mean, so where are we having in the Jewish world in America this conversation? To listen to one another.
Yeah, it's been a struggle.
Is that happening anywhere? Is there any effort?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we are, you know, we certainly tried to create that effort here, and, you know, people don't show up. I'm serious. You know, we had, you know, doctors, you know, Hussein Abish and David Myers, and people don't show up. We both most need to be there. So people are choosing to opt out of the conversation, is what I'm saying. People don't want to be there. Right before the Hussein Abish, David Myers weekend, there were some of the ceasefire people, and they wanted to meet with me about, you know, their ceasefire resolution that they wanted to bring to the city council. And I said, you know, we need to have a conversation about this. Come to this event so we can talk. A few of them showed up, but the leadership did not show up. One of them said, I already know this stuff. And I said, but this is an opportunity to talk with people. People aren't showing up because people are afraid of the conversation, or people think they know the answer. Yeah, it's hard. You know, trying to figure out how to get people to come to the conversation. You know, I've been trying to create these events for young people. I had, right after October 7th, I had a 20s and 30s listening group in my basement. People showed up.
Nobody showed up?
No, people showed up. It was small, it was a small group. Did something else with standing together, but as young people who are like, no, I'm not gonna get together with standing together. I don't want to hear, about Jews and Palestinians working together. I want to hear people who are anti-Israel. And some people are not, some people just aren't showing up. Yeah.
I have another idea for the top of the Seder table. Should be a bowl. It could be a glass or a cup. And in that bowl or glass should be, you dump a box of Band-Aids into it. So people could acknowledge, even when let's not conversation. Has anybody here been bruised by a conversation? And then pass the scarf, put a Band-Aid on. So we could all see and acknowledge one another's hurt or injury. And then say, look, it's happened to all of us. That could be a way of sort of like leveling and toning down the viral.
Yeah.
Put it on your forehead. And your arm, something like that. But I think that'd be another symbol on the Seder table.
So the other thing is that I had suggested in terms of the Seder table, is creating a supplemental Seder plate and asking everybody who's coming through Seder to bring something to put on that Seder plate. And then people can talk about what they brought and why they brought it. So that you're not the one creating all of those symbols. That other people are bringing the symbols. And then, you pick up something from the Seder plate and I said, who brought the Band-Aid? And then Bob would get to talk about that. Who brought the olive? Why did you bring that? What is that symbolic of today? Because all these organizations are telling you what to put on the Seder plate. I frankly think that it's much more interesting about what the people around your table would bring. And then instead of, there's some other organization who decided in their head that's what they wanted. Doesn't really help to include the people in the conversation by just using what others thought. And I also suggested, don't do all the commentary yourself. Say to somebody, I'd like you to bring something about the 4 children. I'd like you to bring something about Halach Ma'anya. I'd like to bring something, about all the different parts of the Seder, Chad Gadya, whatever it is, you bring something, bring an offering. But then people want to be able to share that. And then we can also talk about, how do we, and the other thing you can do is, and this is what we did with that weekend as well, is we had, agreements for how we were going to talk to each other. And, we started out by reading some of what those agreements were. And then we said, so what do people think about those? Do you agree to that? Oh, do you think we should add something? You think we should change anything? And then everybody, made an agreement. And then you can go back to the agreements and say, we agreed. That we were going to talk to each other like this.
I definitely think we should have a third part and everybody tell what happened at their.
We totally could.
Or a glass of wine.
Definitely,
And more
I'm
about
very
the-
curious, yeah.
Yeah, I really feel like the last part of the book is, all the things we've been talking about here. So I feel like I was trying to touch it in a way that was, relevant to.
We need him to write the rest of it.
Well, so anyway, talking about him writing the rest of it. So Daniel is going to come in the fall to Beth Emet. So we'll have a chance also to be able to talk with him, and obviously we'll talk about things that are going on at that time. I was hoping he was going to make it in the spring. He and I spoke a few months ago, and it turns out his travel schedule just got too busy, but he's willing to come in the fall to talk to us. When I went to call to ask him if he would come, I think we had an hour-long conversation about all this stuff. He's got a lot of thoughtful things to say. What it's meant to be part of, the CEO of the New Israel Fund, which funds shared society and democracy projects. Is a very powerful and important organization. What they fund in Israel.
So what's going to be your opening question at the Seder? To start the conversation.
I'm going to have the invitation,
And then,
I'm not going to have. I don't have an opening question, but I will ask people to bring theirs. But I also think that part of what we talk about when we talk about the Seder is, why do we begin with questions? Because questions, when we ask a question, it indicates curiosity. You look at Lee now, because that's his favorite, midah from Tikkun Midot is curiosity. Can we bring curiosity? So when we ask a question, do we bring really an openness to hear the answer, how people are going to answer that? So I'd also, the other thing is that you can ask people to bring questions to your Seder. The reason you have the 4 questions is because there was concern that maybe no questions would be asked at the beginning of the Seder, and so we primed the pump by putting the 4 questions in. That's what the rabbi said. They primed the pump by putting those questions in, but those weren't necessarily the ones that you have to start with. But now, of course, that's become tradition, but they should certainly not be the only ones. And what does it mean to listen to the answer, as opposed to listening so that you can reply, listening so you can tell somebody they're wrong? Again, the worst way to change anybody's opinion is to listen in that way. To listen, to hear, to understand that what is your perspective? Where are the people coming from? Oftentimes, as the invitation said, we find that people are actually coming from a similar place. They care about people. They're concerned about people's safety, right? They may express it differently. There are also, I think, with the young people, I think there's a certain anger that they're coming in this way. An anger that for so many years, the United States has been complicit in what's happened to the Palestinians and hasn't done what needed to be done. And that's true. And feeling like, they want to have their voice heard. If you haven't seen the movie Israelism, I would also recommend that. So Israelism was made, by a couple of young people who really wanted to explore why can't we talk about this within the Jewish community? Have you seen it, Laura?
No,
Okay.
I think it's a great question.
It's a great question. And it follows a couple of young people who were raised with a particular way of thinking about Israel when they were younger, and then really discovering as they got older, the Palestinian perspective and feeling like the American Jewish community had lied to them, and the anger that comes from that, and then their own feeling about how they need to change things moving forward in the future. So one of the people featured is one of the founders of If Not Now, which a group of young people started about 10 years ago during that war with Gaza, and saying, we need to promote justice and peace, and we need to be able to bring out another way of looking at this conflict in a stronger way. So one of the founders, Simone Zimmerman, she starts out by talking about her day school education. And, we talk about from the river to the sea. And then she shows all the maps that she had from her day school education of Israel, which include the West Bank as being part of Israel. So, we say from the river to the sea, Palestine, river through, what are the Palestinians saying? And yet this is what we're teaching our kids, is this is the map of Israel. So who's saying from the river to the sea? Who's showing a map that has all of that on it? And then, learning and hearing, other stories. And as I started out from the first class saying, and my, activism around this issue for all these years, is that I felt that it's very important to learn and understand a variety of perspectives, because I care deeply, because I believe the only way that we're ever going to have a resolution to the conflict is to be able to listen to the hard things, to be able to understand the various perspectives, and then move forward from there. And I think that the willful cutting off of understanding and the willful not really wanting to go into this stuff in depth is one of the reasons we're here. And I feel like, unfortunately, our community has been culpable in that, willfully not wanting to learn. Because it's too painful, and it shatters a romantic idea. Israel, believe it or not, is a nation state. just like the United States is a nation state. Nation states do terrible things. That's the nature of the beast. But unless we confront that, how do we get better? That's what Judaism teaches us. Once we confront what we're doing, how do we get better? Yeah, we gotta go too. Anyway, so I just hope that, as you said, if we do want to get back together, I'll find a time in which we can talk about how things went. Okay.
I was gonna say, I have a completely different thing. I'm going to a Seder where I've never been to with any of the group of people.
Mm.
And,
Good luck.
Yeah, so see if you can get some agreements for conversations or the invitation.
What did you say we should look at on the Lake Street Church website?
Standing together.
Standing together.
Okay.
Yeah. What are the wood and tomorrow?
Like
There.
April.
And then Peter Bernard's in 2010.
Yeah, the Peter Beinart's article in 2010, it's called The Failure of the American Jewish Establishment. Yeah, it was in the New York Review of Books.
Didn't you write a follow-up? I thought there was a second.
Well, there is a second one in which he really talks about his disillusionment with the two-state solution, and so that's the newer one. That's a different, more political event. This is more about what's happening in the American Jewish community. So that's a different, I mean, he's been writing
I
a
read it.
bazillion articles forever. But The Failure of the American Jewish Establishment in 2010 is a very important article, and it's also mentioned in the book. But
Is there any recognition on, when you're talking about mainstream, like the Jewish United Front, the Jewish Federation, that any kind of thought, like somebody was mentioning, that nuanced thought about that?
there has been a movement for that. There's another organization called Resetting the Table that has tried to bring Jews together over difference, to have conversation. So they've done some work on the resetting the table. But I'll tell you, when I first suggested to Federation in 2010 that they'd bring Resetting the Table and do that, I was told that there was, what are you talking about? There's not that kind of difference of opinion in our community. That's what I was told in 2010. And then I heard recently that they brought Resetting the Table in and they're having conversation. And I was like, oh, that sounds familiar. But, to go up. Exactly. It takes a long while. So, resetting the tables when people bring that into their organization. But I'm trying to do that. I was hoping that this would be an opportunity too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Good.
So you done it?
Let me just stop at the front.
Oh, right.